Okay, so we just have a flat plate for our model so far. Let's talk about some extrude options that we have available. So ultimately, if we click on our part over here, and this is a test question, by the way. The Control Tab key allows you to toggle between different open documents. So remember that the Tab key. Write that down. Gives you the capacity in SolidWorks and other Windows program to be able to toggle through different open files that you might have. So I have two files open. One is a completed hinge plate, and the other one is a less than complete hinge plate. And what I'd like to show you in this video is how to put a hole in this thing and some options with the thin extrude feature. So let's do this. We're going to click on the top. We're going to sketch a hole, or sketch a circle out here with the intention of making a hole out of it. We're going to put a dimension on that of 2.75. So this is the easiest sketch you can sketch in SolidWorks. You simply click a point, drag it out, put a dimension on it, and it's fully defined. It's fully defined because we have a coincident relationship with the center, with the origin here in the center, and we have a dimension of 2.75 on that. So if we were to go up here to Features to finish this up, go to Extruded Cut, and we want to do, we're going to talk about it a little bit later, the From options up here. We don't have a lot of From up here. As we talked about before, we can initiate that from a different surface, face, or plane. We can initiate from a different vertex or an offset from it, but we're going to discover that when we have more geometry. We're going to explore that a little bit when we have more geometry. But down here where you want to do through all, we want to make sure it goes completely through the model. And then we're going to go to the check mark. And now we have that in place. Okay, so that was pretty simple. You kind of know about that stuff. But let's do something a little bit crazy here. It really doesn't make sense, but it gives me an opportunity to show you some options in regard to a thin feature that we can do. So what do you do when you want to have a feature in here, or maybe a sketch in here, that you want to keep but don't want to show? I mean, there's a couple things you could do. You can right click on it and tell it to hide, but it's still there. It's still kind of active in the feature manager tree. Let's go ahead and bring that back to life a little bit. Another thing to do is kind of like a middle ground between hiding it and erasing it. It's called suppressing it. That means the affluence of that feature is no longer going to be there. And the way you do that is you right click on it and you go up here to suppress. So it's kind of like erasing it, but you can bring it back from the dead a little bit later if you want to do that. And boy, it looks like we still have a circle in here. And if we have to, if that circle's not going to go away, and let's go and rotate that model around a little bit. I think that's given us a outline of what the sketch is. The sketch is not suppressed, but we can right click into sketch 2 and suppress that. Oh, well, there's a little circle in there. Let's see what happens if we rebuild that. There we go. I don't know why it's there. But if we were to take that sketch, right click on it and unsuppress it, still there. Now if we click in that sketch, we can see it in the background, and we actually can tell it to show. We can show that sketch. You can see it in gray in the background. And if we were to right click on it and tell it to suppress again, and not only hides it, but it suppresses it, gets it out of there. We could always bring that later. But here's a nice little little shortcut in a way. If we're going to bring that whole feature back, if we were to right click on Cut Extrude 1 and unsuppress that, it's got to unsuppress the sketch too. So there's the sketch. Now we're telling the sketch to show, so you can still see the gray outline of that sketch. So we're going to right click on that, we're going to tell that to hide. So that's where we were before. So let's go back to Cut Extrude 1. We should probably rename that, but we're going to keep it as it is for now, and we're going to go ahead and suppress that. And now that's out of there. And that kind of a brown circle that was there before, that's gone too. Okay, so what I'd like to show you is how to do the extruded cut with the thin feature option associated with it. Now one problem with the thin feature is that once you click on the thin feature, you can't get rid of it if you want to change that. But we'll go through that and we'll cover that here in just a minute. So let's do this. This is also kind of crazy. As we go through these videos, I'm going to show you little tips and tricks as we go along here in order to show you, different ways of doing things. And one of those ways is to borrow a sketch. We're going to take our sketch 2 down here. We're actually going to borrow that for our next feature. We're going to keep this feature suppressed, but we're going to take our sketch 2 and use that. So we already have the dimensions in here that we need. So we're going to take that sketch and just run up here and go to Extruded Cut. So the feature tab on our command manager, let's go over here to Extruded Cut and watch that. Watch that when we click on that. When we click on that, whoop, kind of gets out of the way. But once we go into that sketch, now it's got kind of a different look to it. That hand on there means we're actually borrowing that sketch. It's going to be associated with two different features. Pretty cool. So we're going to do the same thing we did before. We're going to go to blind. We're going to go to through wall so we can see the preview of that. And now we're going to go down here to thin feature. Once we press that, you can't go back. You have to erase that feature and do it one more time. But let's talk about what the thin feature is going to do. If we just go to the green check mark here, it's just going to, by the default settings, it's going to give that thickness of that line 1/10 of an inch. You can see its preview in here. And it's going to go off in one direction, which is going to be from that line, which is the dotted green yellow arc in there. And it's going to go off to the outside. But if you do the arrow in here to change direction, reverse direction, now it's going to go on the inside. So just for the fun of it, let's just see what it does. And now it's going to give us an option. So everything is yellow. Everything's giving us highlight. We can select our bodies. So what do we mean by bodies? These are solid bodies. Solid bodies are like parts within parts. They're kind of detached from other parts of the model. They're called solid bodies. And a way you can use these different bodies within a part to put that into an assembly, create different configurations of those different solid bodies, and actually have one part with a number of different solid bodies in it that can be imported into an assembly. Now it looks like you're importing in a bunch of parts, but that's kind of complicated and pretty winded right now, so we're going to ignore that for now. Just know that that option is there. And for a solid body, it's just like two separate parts within a part. It's one way to think about it. So a couple different options here. Well, we could go to the default setting here and click on OK, or we can go to cancel or go to help. And we get SolidWorks help up here. So we want to ignore all these buttons except for OK. Don't press that yet. So it gives us two options down here. We could do selected bodies. And so this brings up this dialog box. We could do body number 1, which is going to be the outside. Unclick that. We can do body number 2, which is going to be on the inside. And these are bodies that are going to show. Or we could do them both. We could actually show them both. If we go to cancel and just do the green check mark one more time, it's going to bring this up. We could do all bodies and go to OK, which is that last option of choosing both of them. So now we kind of have a part within a part. They're not attached to each other. They do have a common sketch in here, and they do have a commonality with a model in here. But they're not separated. So they're two solid bodies. And when you do solid bodies up here, you have a solid bodies folder that you didn't have before. And we're going to cover this in another episode here, but essentially it talks about the different bodies in here, just like you saw in that bodies dialog box. We're going to talk about that some more in a later film, but just remember that we did that. So let's talk about a little bit more about some of the options with the thin feature. If you were to right click on our Cut Extrude 2 and take a look at that, Cut Extrude Thin 2. Let's look at some of our options in here. So we saw one direction, and we go on one side or the other. We could also do mid-plane. What it's going to do is going to take that value of 1/10 of an inch and do 0.05 inches or 50 thousandths of an inch in either side of that. And just to make that a little bit bigger, let's make that maybe 0.4. So now you can see it's going to be 0.2 on either side, 200 thousandths of an inch in either side with the mid-plane. Or a third option in here is two directions. So now it's going to go 0.4 to the outside. Let's make that 0.2. And let's do 0.1 on the inside and see what that looks like. So now it's going to cut a little bit on the inside, cut a lot more on the outside. And then we could do that in the other direction too. If you want to do 0.1 on the outside and 0.2 on the inside, you could do it here. In a way, I was kind of looking for that reverse button, but we can't really do that. But that's how you change that. So 3 different options in here for your thin feature. One direction, reverse, inside, outside, mid-plane, equal distance from the inside to the outside, maybe 0.2 for that. Or the third option over here is two directions. And we could define that maybe 0.1 on one side, which is going to be then outside for that first one, and then the inside for the second one. And that provides you with a thin feature and an extruded cut feature. So yeah, I clicked on the green check mark, so the bodies keep. We're going to go ahead and do all bodies and go to OK. So real quick before we leave this, let's do a real quick summary of what you can use a thin feature for. If we went to the cut extrude number 2 and take a look at that, the thin feature could be applied to not only a cut, but it could be applied to an Extrude Boss base, which means now you're adding material rather than taking away material. And I don't know if this is explained well either, but that line with this option in here for the thickness of that line, which is T1, we're actually taking that line and adding a thickness to it. So hopefully that makes it clear. And then selected bodies, just for the fun of it, let's just do body number 1. Hides body number 2. And we could always bring that up later if we want to, just by right-clicking on that and bringing it into going back to that option in regard to the bodies you want to use. So if we want to go to the green check mark, it's going to ask us one more time for those bodies. And once we do that, again, we have the solid bodies folder up here with both of those parts or those bodies in it. And something else to look at too, I wanted to show you, because that sketch now is part of that cut extrude number 1 as well as the cut extrude thin number 2. So you can see we both have that sketch 2 in here, and it's got that little hand underneath it, which means we're borrowing it from one feature to another, and that's okay. SolidWorks will allow you to do that. And just for the fun of it, let's go and bring up our thin extrude 1, right click on that, unsuppress that, and as long as there's no conflict with the latter feature, it should be okay. So now we have that in there. So if we suppress that, you can see what that does. It kind of overrides what was in there before. And yeah, so all 3 of those features now live in harmony within our part. So before we leave this completely and get us set up for the next video, let's go ahead and take, just for the fun of it, let's take that cut extrude thin 2 and right click on it and let's delete it. And guess what's going to happen? What do you think is going to happen with the sketch 2 that's in here? Right now it shows a symbol of being borrowed, but if we were to right click on that, we're going to go ahead and delete that feature. It goes back to where it was before, and it's pretty cool. And that's what we want. We want to make sure we have that hole in the middle that says 2.750. So let's go ahead and do this. Let's call this our base extrude, and we're going to call this our center hole. And this is what we're going to be calling these for these features from this point on. So thank you for joining me. Join me in another video.